Welcome to Mistakes Were Made. This week we have an extra special live episode, our first ever live podcast episode. Before we play it, we did want to give a little bit of background about where we recorded this episode and where it's coming from. Sarah, do you want to tell us a little bit about what's going on?
Sure. Yeah. This was an episode that was recorded as part of a lecture series that was put on by Evergreen Hearts, a nonprofit that works to convene and educate the poly community here in the Pacific Northwest. And it was part of a lecture series. They asked us to come on and talk about common poly mistakes. We talked about our top 3 favorite mistakes. It was a really, really fun evening and lots of great questions, a wonderful audience, and it was really exciting to be able to do the podcast live for the first time. It made me feel like a real grown-up podcaster. And since we recorded the episode, there have been community concerns raised about Evergreen Hearts, specifically leadership and transparency and mishandling of power inside the leadership structure of the organization. And we've been contacted by other poly organizations around town to share these concerns. And so we do. And we have reached out to Evergreen Hearts and asked them about what their plan for repair and transparency in the community looks like. And they have offered some response, and we will put a link to that inside of these show notes. I believe that it's an opportunity for people who feel like they've been harmed or have a complaint about the way the organization is run to share that, and then there's going to be some kind of mediated process. And so I just wanted to let folks know that this is on our radars, on our minds. We share these same concerns, and we're going to be following that process of repair really closely. And the outcome of that process is going to dictate how much of a relationship we feel like mistakes were made can have with Evergreen Hearts.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving that background. And I'm so excited to share this episode with the listeners. It was so fun to be there, and just a really new experience, kind of, to have an audience that was responding and interacting.
Yeah, it's not a laugh track. Those were actual people laughing.
It's real people, although we're going to save it and use it as a laugh track.
Yeah, we definitely use it.
No, but you and Alex did such a great job. I imagine it was intimidating. But you really you were total pros. I had such a great time. It was really cool. And so without further ado, let's listen.
Yeah. Thanks, Jess. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for having us. So my name is Sarah, she, her pronouns. I wanted to let you all know that we're recording this as a live episode for our podcast. Thank you, Jessica. No names will be used, so we're going to keep you all confidential. I'm a queer poly therapist. I'm a writer, I'm a parent, and increasingly an activist as well. I'm realizing, Alex, the last time that you and I gave a lecture together, it was to a group of bright-eyed journalism students, and I don't know what's harder, teaching people how to do journalism or polyamory.
Yes, both. Really gluttons for punishment.
Yeah.
In that way. I'm Sarah's husband, Alex, and we used to work together as international journalists for a lot of years, and then we taught journalism and communication together. And now, as Sarah said, she's a therapist, and I am a communication educator.
Still out there communicating.
Yep, still communicating. Love it. And now we do this podcast together that is called Mistakes Were Made. We have a new logo that our friend Roy just did. Our friend who's a professional graphic designer, as you can see. It has butts.
We're very excited.
And it's cool. It's better than the first logo that I made on Canva. It was fine.
Also cute.
If you haven't heard the podcast before, you can find it on your podcast platform of choice, wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, There are some other ones. Can you tell I say that all the time on the podcast?
I was just like, your phone.
Yeah, right. And yeah, so we've had 3 seasons. We're in our 3rd season of the podcast. We're almost done with the 3rd season, probably, unless we keep coming up with good episode ideas.
Keep making mistakes.
And it sort of started with us a little bit after we opened our marriage. In whenever that was, in the middle of COVID. And yeah, it's
like
been,
you do.
Yeah, totally normal.
It's chill.
Yeah, and that has been a smooth, perfect process, right, Sarah?
Pretty much,
We've done
yeah.
everything
That's what the
perfectly,
podcast is about, just like how
great
well
we
we
are.
did it from beginning to now. No, as the title suggests, mistakes were made for sure. And we actually started the podcast just to explore those mistakes. And I don't know that we were actually expecting that anybody else was going to listen to all of our embarrassing stories, but I guess.
I feel like Jessica made us do it, really.
Yeah,
It was
it was
her
mostly
idea.
your fault, Jessica.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. But we've embraced the learning that comes from making mistakes and being messy, and keep trying to resist the urge to think that polyamory is something that you can or should try and do perfectly. I feel like I have to remind myself every day that the reason why it's a great way of doing relationships for me is because it is messy and complex and offers me so many opportunities to learn. So want to give a lecture about some of those
I
big
guess
learning mistakes?
Totally prepared for that.
Okay, let's do it.
Yes, I might start stimming in the middle of this.
Yeah.
Are you nervous?
Yeah, I'm super
Usually when we
nervous.
record the podcast, there's nobody else there, and we just imagine people there.
And we're like
kind of,
in our
but-
pajamas,
yeah.
and I have like 3 different beverages right
Yeah.
here.
Mhm. And we can edit things later.
Yeah.
So we're gonna see what we can do. Okay, so this is you. Talk
Yeah.
about what we're talking about.
Let's talk about what we're talking about. A little to expect from us today. We've identified like some common mistakes and challenges for people that are new to non-monogamy, especially folks who were previously in monogamous relationships or long-term monogamous relationships who are opening up. That tends to be the kind of relationships that I specialize in working with in my practice. So that's where a lot of this is drawn from. It's our personal area of expertise as well. Alex and I were in a monogamous relationship for 150
Yes.
years. many, many years.
15 years, I
It was
think.
15 years, yeah.
It felt like 100.
Yeah, thanks. I set myself up for that. We'll dive into 3 examples. We'll offer up embarrassing anecdotes as promised, provide a little bit of therapeutic context. And yeah, for each one, we're going to have an audience prompt so you can offer up some of your hard-earned wisdom as well. Alex?
Yeah.
Let's make them embarrass themselves a little
Yes,
bit.
we definitely will. Starting now, actually. Activities are great. Thank you for having so many activities, Camille. That was wonderful. Definitely from our time in teaching, I learned activities are the best because then you can make other people do stuff rather than you. So we want to start with like who's here, just to get a sense of who we all are, and it's always nice to know who the audience is. So let's start with like a show of hands of how many people are in their like first 6 months of non-monogamy or polyamory, like pretty new. Cool. Thank you for sharing. What about in your first like couple of years? Wow. Okay. So like a lot of people, like first like 5 years. Does anybody have like more than 5 years? Yeah. Okay. We're around there. Yeah. What about, is there any like gold star poly people here who have never
Born poly, stayed poly.
never
Always
been
poly,
in
gonna die poly.
the dark realm of monogamy? Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Respect.
Damn. Okay. Cool. All right. What about anyone thinking about polyamory but not sure yet? Kind of on the fence, one way or the other. Cool. Yeah. Thank you. And I'm curious also, folks who came to polyamory like via monogamy or a monogamous relationship, like opening up kind of a monogamous relationship. Right? Solo poly folks, what's up? Hey. And what about, has anybody here ever made a mistake in one of your polyamorous relationships? I haven't. Yeah. Exactly.
Wow.
Cool. Good. Whew.
That's
Thank
to check if you're paying attention.
All right, yeah,
Okay,
so
cool.
how are they gonna participate?
Yeah, more activities. So we're using this Mentimeter thing, and with that, you can give us live feedback. So yes, get out your phone if you haven't already, please, and point it at the QR code, or go to menti.com and put in that code up there, 64605859. And you'll see this question, and you can type in a response. What's a rule that you have in your relationship, one of your relationships? Just kind of anything that comes to mind. It can be a good rule, a bad rule, something that you've kind of agreed upon with your partner, or is sort of like along the lines of the rules. We just want to start getting a sense of like what are some of the rules and things that people are coming up with. Let's see what happens.
Is that working?
Oh, did that work?
Yeah,
I think it's working. Okay, there's one's showing up. That's great.
Oh, cool.
It's happening.
Let's look at that. So one rule that someone mentioned was we don't host.
Mhm.
So that hosting other partners in your place. Any other rules, like maybe two more, just to get a sense? Yeah.
Don't date anyone that has a veto rule.
Don't date anyone with a veto rule. Will you explain what is a veto?
So I'm a solo poly, so I won't date anyone whose partner is allowed to veto me.
Okay, got it. Cool. What else? One more, maybe? Yeah.
We don't have metamors in our bedroom.
Okay. So you can host people at your house, but not in your bedroom.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks for sharing some of those. One of the reasons that we started there is because I know for you and I, when we first opened up, it was one of the most natural questions we asked was, what are the rules, right?
Kind of.
Okay.
We asked them. We didn't really do
Okay,
very much
we
planning
now
at all.
have made some
It was
mistakes and then we were
just,
like, we need some rules. And also I would say with folks who I'm working with who are opening up after many years of monogamy, that's very commonly they come and they're like, what rules should we have? Sometimes what agreements should we have? And a little bit like distinctions between rules and agreements, but like, what can we do to make this feel a little safer and a little less scary, essentially, right? And I would say that I guess how I would put this is most folks also have the experience of very quickly breaking those rules in some way, shape, or form. So if people feel comfortable doing this as an also like just live poll, how many people have broken an agreement or a rule in a relationship at some point? Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really natural part of the process, if very painful, and an early mistake that we kind of experienced. Alex, do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, this is the part where I have
You're
to
up, bud.
say embarrassing, dumb things that I did. So one common one that I think you've said like comes up a lot for your clients, and definitely I've heard from people too, especially people like opening monogamous marriages at the beginning, is being like, we were not going to get serious with other people. Like, we're kind of very protective of our marriage or primary partnership, and none of the other relationships are going to be serious. And I think that was something that we maybe we didn't put it in writing, but it was definitely the vibe, I think.
I think that was an agreement. And I would say it's pretty common for folks to say don't fall in love, right? Or keep the relationships casual. And you can have feelings about that, but that is a really common kind of rule or agreement that people try and put in place early on, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so when we started dating, I went out on a date with this. I think the second date that I went on was with somebody that it just kind of, it was pretty good. We had good vibes. I was I hadn't dated in 15 years or something like that, and very poorly prior to that. So I had very little experience. And so I was just pretty excited, and it was working, and it felt pretty good. So me and that person started seeing each other once a week, and we started talking about sleeping at each other's houses, and we started going beyond just it definitely wasn't it's just fun anymore. It was it started to feel a lot more serious, and I think that was all okay, but the worst part about it was Sarah noticed that in the ways that you would as an intuitive person who was in a
Like,
relationship.
wow, you're gone like a couple times a week and you're out going on trips and things seem to be getting serious, basically.
And like, I really kind of like, I think because I didn't know what I was doing, but also because I felt very like defensive about that. I like kind of like minimized what was going on in that relationship, like to her, maybe to myself, but definitely to her, and was like, no, like, okay, this is a source of bad feelings for you, so let me like try to shut that down and be like, no, that's not what's happening. It's not that big of a deal, it's just like convenient. I just, like the person, but it's not like.
Totally worked, I bought it. And
Yes, it's a real pushover.
I was like, phew, okay then.
And here we are, everything's perfect. So how did that make you feel, Sarah? That's what I want to ask.
It was awful.
Yeah.
And it was awful, I think, not at the time. It probably felt awful because I'm like, but we have this agreement and we have this rule and you're breaking the agreement and you're breaking the rule and now I'm scared and this is out of control and this was a huge mistake, but we're in too deep. And I think in retrospect, what felt bad about it was that we were not being honest with ourselves, each other, and the other people in our lives. And that was ultimately like what felt really bad and scary. And like there was more distance growing between us, not necessarily because you were developing feelings for someone else, but because you couldn't be honest with me about what was going on in your life.
They always say it's not the crime, it's the cover up.
That is what you always say, yeah. That's definitely what you always
Watergate.
say.
That's what always happens. But seriously, like you sort of pretend that, or I sort of, maybe if, like you're saying, if I had communicated about the thing and how I was feeling and kind of like really embodied it for myself and then like shared that with you, it probably would have been more okay, but it was like a lot harder to be like, no, that's not what's going on. It's no big deal.
We had this rule, we had this agreement, we can't break it.
Yeah.
If we do that, then we're failing at
Right.
polyamory.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that the mistakes there are obvious on my side. What do you feel like was a mistake on your side?
I think that.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I think the mistake on my side was thinking that I could control what was happening in someone else's relationship, and that I could control what happens in relationships in general. I think that was the biggest, hardest lesson of polyamory early on, and probably continues to be something that I'm always engaging with. I really like the idea that you could control stuff like that, but if I figure out how to successfully, I will let you all know. Yeah. But so far, it's looking like you really can't.
Yeah.
And I think like not really recognizing that was the point of why I wanted to have relationships with other people, why I wanted you to have relationships with other people, was not to try and control and manage it, and frankly, just make it feel like safe and not challenging all the time, but to let things like change and grow between us and other people. And that knowing the difference between something being like an edge that is scary, right? But that I want to kind of tolerate and self-soothe through, versus something that is a boundary that has been broken. And I think that's where like, rules and agreements and all of that stuff can get like complicated, right? Because we're also always changing. And as we move through these experiences, we change again. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I think it's also like when you're starting from the place of like two people in a relationship, and then you do like, and people do varying degrees of this, like imagining what it's going to be like when we change the dynamics of that relationship or like open it up. You're not really thinking about specific people that you're going to be having those relationships with, right?
Oh dang.
Yeah. And like the rule is kind of impossible. Like they're real, you're going to be engaging with real actual people who have feelings, and you have feelings for them, you have feelings for each other, and like suddenly this agreement or like this hard and fast rule that you came up with about like how you're going to feel, it's like you can't really follow the rule. It's like kind of an impossible rule, the idea that like you wouldn't catch feelings or whatever.
Or you could manage the seriousness or the depth of attachment. Mm-hmm. And I think like that is what I keep coming back to, is that love and attachment happen. They happen all kinds of ways. We can learn about those ways and how they happen for us, but that our understanding of that and our understanding of ourselves is always changing and growing. And I feel like in every new relationship that I'm in, I am surprised by what that experience is like. And I can't be as predictive about it as I would like. Yeah.
So you have a better concept that you like better than the idea of rules, right?
Yeah, I think about it as guardrails. For whatever reason, that has been like a helpful metaphor for me and for some of my clients. It's like, what are some guardrails that we can put in place, recognizing that things change, and we don't want to set ourselves up with a bunch of rules that we're going to break, and then have a bunch of broken trust and fear on top of trying to do something new. So one of the guardrails that emerged for you and I around that time, do you remember this? We decided that we were going to have a standing coffee date, right? Mm-hmm. And at that standing coffee date, it's when we would check in on where we were in our relationships with other people.
Because if you're like conflict averse, like I am, you will never bring up the thing that's the hard thing to talk about, right? Like being like, yes.
Just telling Alex to communicate honestly is not. You gotta create some guardrails.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Some structure. I want structure.
Yeah.
You know, because it's never gonna be like, oh, it's 9 p.m. on Tuesday or whatever. Now is the time I want to have this difficult conversation. So yeah, I think it was very helpful to us to like create some standing structure around that. And it's like sometimes there was nothing hard to talk about, and then sometimes there was really hard stuff to talk about, but like we always kind of knew when we were going to do that, and this is the time, the fixed time to do that. And we also talked about money during that time, which is kind of an aside, but like I think that's
like the two hardest relationship issues for us.
Yeah. If you're in like a co-financial relationship, you got to talk about that stuff too, and like if you don't, then maybe it'll like kind of fester in the same way.
I think it also helped us, this question of like when something was being kept as a secret and like how long it took you to divulge that something had changed. This was one of the ways that like rules were hard for us, because Alex would be like, well, yeah, it's changing, but like I just realized that like 3 days ago and I needed to figure out how I felt about it, right?
Right,
Or,
it's not like the skies parted and sun came down and I was like, I have feelings for this person. I better go tell Sarah right away. Like it happened slowly. Yeah.
So I think that helped too, because it just like provided us with a space where it's like, we have agreed that this is where we discuss this stuff as it comes up. And that felt like a guardrail that was really helpful for us.
Yeah, for sure. I do want to, real quick before we move on, also talk about like this idea that comes up a lot too of keeping up with your partner. I feel like I hear a lot of people who are like newly opening relationships, really like having this instinct to be like, okay, if you do this thing, then I need to do that thing too. So we're like on the same page. So if you have sex with somebody else, I have to have sex with somebody else. If you meet somebody that you're starting to see like once a week, then I need to be doing that. If you're sleeping over at somebody's house, I'm going to do that too. And kind of putting pressure on each other to do that. I think that's definitely another pitfall that we fell into. And then, I feel like you maybe like accelerated relationships that you weren't as interested in to keep up with me. And I encouraged you to do that.
Yes, that happened. I think that is something that comes up a lot with couples and relationships I work with who are opening up for the first time, is this idea of fairness. It's like, we have to really keep things fair. And if you're having this experience, then we have to time it so that I also have this experience, or we have this experience together. And it's understandable, again, that feels safe at first. And it feels like you can kind of control things that might feel scary or out of control. And this is another place where like rules and agreements will get broken really quickly between couples, where, it's like, well, you're doing all of this stuff and I'm not, and you're going faster, and that's not fair, and that's not what we agreed to. But again, we're interacting with the real world and with lots of diverse people, and also we're different. And I think one of the things that emerged for the two of us really quickly was that our pacing with some of this stuff was really different.
We wanted different things, and different things were going to feel good. I was actually talking to a friend who has just opened his marriage the other day, and he was talking about how him and his wife have completely different like kind of desires and what they want out of relationships, and she just wants to have very like sex forward relationships, and he's like kind of tried that and was like, I'm not really interested in that. I would much rather, have these like emotional connections with people that maybe are like not sexual at all. And to the other person, either of those things can be kind of equally threatening, like especially if it's not the thing that you're feeling like you want, then seeing your partner do that can maybe be like scarier even, because it's like, why do they want that thing? It doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's another piece of this, which is just recognizing how much of your life you want to be spent in polyamory, which can be different for different partners too. And I think like
All of it.
yes, we know, Alex.
Especially during COVID, it was very boring. Like, what else were we gonna do?
It's boring during COVID. It's true. It is true. But I think that was kind of a mistake that I made, was that I lost touch with myself in regards to what I wanted in polyamory, what was interesting and exciting about it for me. And because you were faster paced, I just kind of always felt like I was doing it wrong, or I was falling behind, or I like wasn't poly enough. And there was just like a lot of pressure that I was putting on myself. And I think that that's something that I just like keep sort of engaging with and recognizing about myself. Like, I do love being polyamorous, I do love dating, I love being in other relationships. I also like spending time doing other stuff too. Not that you don't, you do too. But and I was gonna say like the guardrail that emerged from that was being honest with ourselves and each other about how much time we had for this and we wanted to have for this, and like how it felt, and trying to stay connected to that.
Totally. Okay, let's make them do
Yes,
stuff
please,
now.
God, make them do something.
Okay, so I guess this wasn't going to work, but we can just do it with hands. A leading question into the next section. Are you still close with any of your exes? Okay, let's start with yes. How many people are like, yes? Okay, that's a good, yeah. It is working, kind of. Okay, what about no? Anybody be honest? Yeah. And okay, yeah, so it's about 50-50. And then it's complicated. Yeah, what do you mean by close? They are physically near at times. But I don't like it. Okay, what about you, Sarah? What is your...
Yeah.
This is small data.
I was partly looking at my notes because I was like, I don't
Just desperately. What is
I don't know how to answer this. I think I wish I was closer to my exes than I am. Like when I really think about that question, I recognize that I'm not actually that close to my exes.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I'm like in bad relation. I mean, there's that one guy, but
I don't know which one you're talking about.
damn.
So maybe
there's more than one.
Maybe there's more than one, yeah.
But I wouldn't say like I'm in bad relationship with them, but I wouldn't say that I'm in close relationship with any of my exes. No.
Yeah, I would say the same, like less than I would like to admit. There are fewer people that, who I've dated who I'm still in touch with. So why, and it seems like there's a lot of yeses, which is great. You guys are more evolved than us, obviously, but we're still gonna talk about all this stuff. Why do you think that's so hard? Like, why do you think it's so hard for people to stay close with their exes, writ large, not just in polyamory?
Yeah, I tend to think because like monogamy and conscripted monogamy is this real all or not. It's somehow both all or nothing and a constantly moving target. It's like this impossible needle to thread. But I think the idea of staying close to your exes gets monogamy kind of closer to non-monogamous ideas. That it's just like, this was someone that you once had intimate feelings for, you were in love with maybe, this is someone that you like had crossed into that monogamy space with. And once they're exiled from that space, there is no in between. You're either in that space or you're out of that space, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there's just like that kind of total thinking that comes with it.
And I guess I kind of feel, I want to be in good relationships with my exes because I feel stupid if I'm not. Like, my former self really liked this person. So it's very like kind of weird to have the narrative like that they're a bad person, right? Like, well then what was I thinking spending all this time dating them, right? And And I think that comes up for a lot of, and that's sort of like, I think that's maybe like one of the common things that comes up in monogamy, though, is just like you kind of have to jettison people to move on to the next person, right? Like that's sort of like, otherwise you can't, if this person is going to be your everything, then every previous person who was going to be your everything kind of has to be like
A nothing.
yeah, but no, yes, have to be delegitimized so that you can move ahead to the next.
Right, which kind of gets into our next topic, or like a common pitfall, which is still getting on the relationship escalator inside of polyamory. I think that like all or nothing thinking is certainly deeper into like my bones than I would like to admit. I think that the kind of training there is pretty strong. And there is just this sense that for relationships to matter and to be real, they have to follow these scripts, and these scripts are just like set. It's like you meet, you go on 2 dates, on the third date you have sex, and then I don't know, that's what I've heard. I've heard some people do that. And then you like start spending the night. It's to say, I know for you it's not the third. And then you spend the night, you meet the friends, and then you meet the family, and you go on trips. I don't know all of the order of these things, but you know, it's just like there's another step that escalates the relationship and legitimizes the relationship, and you have to be working towards it all the time. Otherwise, what's happening is not succeeding.
I think you mean first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes the baby and the baby carriage.
Of course, the problem is
How many babies are you going to have?
how many babies?
Not more than 2, I would advise. Now it's your turn to tell an embarrassing story about something.
Yes,
that you
okay,
did.
all right. Yeah. So the first relationship that I got into after you and I opened up was fun, exciting, great, lovely guy. Not the bad ex that I mentioned before. But it, to me, because I also had not dated in 15 years, I was just like, this is the only way I know how to date, is like, you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. And if you aren't doing these things, then like the love isn't enough, or it doesn't seem real, or it's not like, I'm not succeeding at the relationship. And so I was just like sort of blowing through all of those steps pretty quickly.
Checking the boxes.
I was checking a lot of boxes. Yeah. Like,
Be specific.
and I don't want to say it's like, I can only think of this like really, I was like, I got in too deep, you know? I was just like, I was deeper into this relationship than actually made sense to me, than actually like matched with what worked for us. It's not even like a measure of whether or not we had the material or the chemistry or the love. It was just like, I feel like I woke up one morning in that relationship and I was like, what the fuck have I done? Like, and it's not even a commentary on this person. It was just like, I felt like I had been in some kind of fugue state, and I had just like,
It's like plowed ahead towards the goal. Yeah.
And then I realized like, wait, what is the goal again? Like, I am not gonna marry this person or have babies in a baby carriage. We could kiss in a tree. That would be... sounds fun. But it just like really was a huge wake-up call. And I remember like I'm feeling that feeling of panic right now as I think about it, of the just like, oh God, like I just don't even know what I'm doing or why I'm doing it.
Do you need a puppet?
I need my fidget.
Put on some chapstick. And I remember you going on an overnight trip with that person, which I think was after I had gone on an overnight trip with that person that I was referencing earlier, and coming back, and it seemed like you were just like you'd seen a ghost.
Yeah. Alex was like, did you have fun? And I was like, mm-mm. And you were like, do you want to talk about it? And I was
you
like,
lied a little bit.
I'm going to talk about it in a couple of years at a lecture. I don't know. I'm not ready.
Yeah, relatable. Definitely. Like the idea that you're doing the things not just that like you feel like you're supposed to do it, because even if you know that you're not really supposed to do those things according to like the the agreements or boundaries in your relationship, just like conditioning to like do those things is powerful. And I think especially, I mean, you could speak to this, but like between men and women too, if you're like straight conditioned, then there's just like this power of like, you know, I'm in a relationship with a woman and it has to go to this place, or like I have captivated this male attention and that's the most important thing that ever happened.
Casually leans stool.
Sarah, you claim to be immune to that, and I definitely have heard a lot of people say that. Sarah gives 0 fucks about male attention anymore.
No, that's not true. not zero fucks. Please feel free to pay attention to me later. I will like it.
At the pizza party, pay attention to Sarah. Me too. I want everyone to pay attention to me, as you can see.
But I would say, like, in our demographic also, and again, kind of like speaking to that specialty of middle-aged people who open up after many years of monogamy, it can kind of feel like you fell off the back of the relationship escalator. It's like, it's like, you did all of the things, and then you're like, well, but we're not dead. Like,
Where is this going? Yeah.
20 to 30 more years, I mean, hopefully.
You're saying like when you're in a monogamous relationship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I was going to say that there's an increasing demographic of clients who are showing up in my practice who are in their 40s and 50s, who have done a lot of that traditional stuff, whose kids are now leaving home and really find themselves being like like bird watching or fucking other people.
Why choose, though? I say why choose.
You don't have to choose.
We're like having fish. Fish keeping. That's
Fish
what
keeping is
that's
what
I'm
I'm getting into.
Talk to me about it later.
All right. Okay. Wait.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
where are we,
focus,
and why
yeah.
were we? Why did this?
Yeah.
What did this have to do with exes?
So if you're not on the relationship escalator, then the way that you break up is different, right? It doesn't have to be that way. I don't think that you don't have to like just fully break with the previous person to start with somebody new. You know, I think there's maybe there's a closure thing that monogamy is doing to just like let's like put that behind us so we can move into the next thing and like fully focus on that with 100% of ourselves, which sucks because those were people that you liked and were great. And like I think in polyamory there are good reasons that people break up also, as I'm sure all of you know from having gone through those kinds of breakups. But it doesn't have to be that like replacement thing where like, okay, we gotta like find this new person who's gonna be the person for me. But usually I feel like I was trying to like think of some of the reasons that people break up in monogamous or non-monogamous relationships, because I just never do. I just wait for the people to break up.
I know. I feel like you'd really rather that
happens.
it didn't ever happen. I know.
Yeah. Anyway, overshare. Because of like capacity or like your interest just waning or like what you're going through, like traumatic shit that people are going through. Like sometimes it's not the right time to be in that relationship with that person or any relationships with any people, I guess. Or
like we were talking about earlier, we change. And like we change inside of the relationships, we change ourselves. Sometimes we can change together and it makes sense to continue to like choose each other for that. And sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. Okay, so what would you say is the lesson of this section as we bring it to a close? Sarah, tell us what to think.
I mean...
Sorry, is that too much pressure?
No, I think it's to cultivate excitement for building relationships that work for the people that are in the relationships. And as much as possible, like, have fun with that idea and have fun with the idea of like being able to have different types of relationships. Polyamory and non-monogamy is exciting for the opportunity to not just repeat the same relationship many, many times, but to have lots of different types of relationships and to see them as fun and successful and interesting, no matter how long they last. And I was thinking, one of my favorite relationships that I feel like I've had since we opened up was pretty non-traditional. There was a guy who lived out of state, and he worked in Seattle sometimes, and he would fly into Seattle once a month, probably, And we would go to a really fancy dinner that we had like identified ahead of time, right? And we were just like get really excited for. We would get a little too drunk. We would talk about so many feelings. We would make out in the parking lot, and then I would take a Lyft home. And we would text like 2 weeks later, what fancy restaurant do you want to go to next?
Yeah. Living the dream, right? And he paid too.
Yeah, it's that. Yeah, that was part of what made it awesome too. But no, I was gonna say like I think a lot of people made fun of me for that relationship, and like I remember people being like, "Is that going somewhere? Like, are you guys gonna have sex at some point, or like see each other's houses or anything?" And I was like, I don't know. I feel like the parking lot thing is good. I'm like, I don't care. And you know, we probably did that for let's say like 6-7 months, and then the circumstances of his relationships changed and it wasn't available anymore. And I feel like that was a really successful relationship. It was like literally one of my favorite ones, you know, and it just like didn't follow any of the scripts or the escalators or the rules or whatever. And if you're listening to this, I would like to be friends with you as my ex. So
It's too bad there's no way to commemorate that. Like, you know, it just,
Yeah.
there's no, you should get a certificate of like, a certificate of achievement for a really good relationship. And you can like both sign it and then be like,
yay!
done.
Pretty good.
Okay, so moving on. We have one more prompt about metamors. I want to know, do you like your metamors? You probably know this, but a metamor is like a person that you're dating is also dating. Your partner's partners. Raise your hand if yes, you hang with your metamors. Totally cool. Okay, good.
What's up to Metamor's audience?
What about people? No, don't. I have do you have at least one metamor that you're not? You're putting yourself on blast, but one that you have beef with a little bit, or in the past. If your partner's here, you can just refer to somebody from the past. Okay, yeah, it happens, right?
Yes.
And then there's some people that don't have any, and then this says. It's hidden by the thing. It says, never met him.
Oh,
Is that a pun?
That's good.
Close. Okay, so, people have different, I feel like this is like a defining kind of thing about relationship styles, right? Like we like assign names to types of polyamorous relationships or like non-monogamous relationships, like kitchen table is like, you kick it with your metamors and
There's garden parties and tea parties.
garden party is you play croquet with your metamors. I don't actually know what that means.
There's a lot of stuff. I don't know them all either.
So yeah, it's important, right? If you're in relationships, like maybe that's the hardest thing. If you're in relationships with multiple people, like that cross thinking, those cross relationships are difficult. How about you? How do you feel? What's your answer to this question? Do you like your metas?
I mean,
yeah.
the first thing I would say is, like all people, some of them, you know, I do like knowing metas for sure, and I like the opportunity to meet them, and you know, some of them I've gotten closer to than others. But I would say in general, yeah, I think I do. Yeah.
Me too.
Okay.
But why? So I was talking to my hair cutter.
Who I feel like you're actually in a non-monogamous relationship with, like non-traditional non-monogamous relationship with, but
relationship, yes.
Another conversation.
She knows how to cut my hair, and I was telling her about coming to this tonight, and she was like, "Oh, my friend's poly," and she was like talking about how like her husband dates the people, and she was like, "I like all of them except for this one." That I fucking hate so much. So that comes up, right? I feel like even the most evolved people sometimes have that like ick feeling about metas. Does this like come up in your practice? Are your clients talking about this? And like, what do you think it's about?
I mean, I would say this is top 3 things that clients will be talking about is what's going on in the relationships with metas. And what I think is interesting about that is that can be the case whether or not they've ever met them. And I'm just like, yellow flag.
Yeah. It'd be worse if you haven't met them.
Yeah.
Right? Which is interesting. What's going on there?
Dun, dun, dun,
Is
dun.
there
A term for it?
that?
Yes, in fact, there is.
There's even a Canva illustration for it, which I was amazed. Like, somebody made that. It wasn't me.
Yeah. Okay, so triangulation is a term that probably a number of you have heard before. We use it a fair amount. It's like a little bit therapy speak. You'll recognize that. But the idea is that instead of like taking responsibility for something that is going on with you that might make someone else upset, you sort of outsource it elsewhere. It's like, I feel like a more neutral example might be like about where you're gonna spend the holidays, right? And you're like, well, I wish we could spend them at your parents' house, but my mom will kill me if I don't spend it at her house. Like, I don't wanna do it, but I have to, right? And in that situation, I'm kind of triangulating my mom, which...
Yeah. So people do this
in that
outside
case, it's
of
fine.
romantic
For me, that's
relationships
okay.
too.
What's that?
Sorry.
Yes. People do it in all kinds of relationships. And it's just, I mean, it's very human. We all engage in it. It's hard to take responsibility for wanting something or not wanting something that might make someone you care about upset or have a difficult feeling.
Yeah.
And so, you know, lobbing that elsewhere or sort of diffusing some of that responsibility is a common technique. And I think it shows up a lot in polyamory and in polycules and with metas. So,
Because it's like right there. If you don't want to talk about the hard thing that you want to do. And like, I guess I did that with this first relationship that we were talking about sometimes. Like, I was like, she just really wants me to sleep over like once a week. And she's going to be mad if I don't do that. So that's
like,
your problem
chill,
now,
that's
Sarah.
chill, okay, fine.
And like, when we were preparing for this talk, this was like 4 years ago. And Sarah's still pissed off.
Salt, there was still salt.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
To be triangulated, right? Mm-hmm. And we also know, maybe we can talk shit about some of our exes, because this has definitely happened to me. I think it's happened to you.
Yeah.
I was dating somebody who was kind of like newish to non-monogamy and had been in a long-term relationship, and then she like slowly started dating the person that she had broken up with recently, like kind of like started going back to date him more. And I was like, that's great, like totally fine, except for the fact that you talked so much shit about him for so long.
So awkward.
I've never met him, but he seems like a dick based on what you've said. But still, I was open to it because I wanted to like her to like have a full like range of fulfilling relationships or whatever. And then when she broke up with me, rather than like taking responsibility for wanting to, she was just kind of like, he can't hang with non-monogamy, so I'm just going to go back to being monogamous with him. And like, you know, I would love to be in this relationship, but like, I'm not allowed to.
Yeah, sad.
Ew.
That's a bad
Sucked.
one. That's a bad one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got a lot of empathy in this audience.
It does. That was. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Has anything like that ever happened to you?
Something very similar. I was in a relationship with someone who started a relationship with somebody new, and that person was uncomfortable with our existing relationship, and that discomfort just kept kind of like whittling away the things that we were like allowed to do, the time we were allowed to spend together, what it was allowed to be like. And it was really hard to know the difference between being like sensitive to what someone's like needs were and to like a meta's needs and struggles, and when it just felt like maybe my partner was trying to end the relationship with me, but not being completely honest, right? Maybe it wasn't right for her to be in relationship with both of us. And I still think that may be more what happened. That we had kind of come to the end of our time together, and she was looking for something else. And this meta was also uncomfortable. And so, it was a really it still bothers me, which is like kind of, I'm sure, apparent right now. It still bothers me because it just doesn't feel like what happened and how it ended was real, you know? And that kind of like triangulation that was happening, I think, is part of what contributed to that. So, yeah.
Like you just want the person to just break up with you on their own terms, not because of some other person.
Someone I had never met doesn't like me. And I'm like, give me a chance.
Yeah. So I like this term just because once you like can verbalize it, then you can like see it happening, and it happens so much, and it's so like tempting to do it. Like we were just talking about earlier, like
That's right.
like this happened like in our relationship for a long time with my family. I would like kind of try to like protect you from my family, and you know, just like struggle with this. Like, do I tell Sarah like what I want or like what they want, and like how do I navigate? It was like very hard for me to like embody the person that I was with my family and the person that I was in our relationship. And like if you I thought you weren't gonna like things that they were doing, which would be justified in many cases.
No comment.
I would get super stressed about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is really hard. And I think it's something that like, again, like so many of the kind of pitfalls that we've been exploring, I don't know about all of you, but I don't actually expect that I'll ever just graduate on from this stuff. I think like, I mean, again, if I figure that out, I'll let you know. Y'all will be the first to know. But I think that these are just like the material that we have to engage with as we're exploring being in relationship in different kinds of ways, with more intention, with more honesty, with more vulnerability, and with like more creativity.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're almost out of time. Like one more slide that I've really wanted to make since I knew that we were going to do this talk. I wanted this to be the only slide because it's been a big thing for me to like realize that it's so easy to like be, if you're like a people pleaser, it's so easy to be like, what do these people want from me? And then you just keep having more and more relationships with more and more people who will want more and more things, or you'll perceive them to want more and more things. And you'll like develop these rules with your partner and doing all this stuff to like kind of satisfy other people. And it's a good way of evading having to know and take responsibility for like what your actual desires are and what your actual boundaries are. And like, for me, I think just like knowing that and figuring that out has like been the hardest thing about non-monogamy. Like owning it. This is what I want to do. This is what I don't want to do.
Right.
It's me, not anybody else.
Yeah. It makes me think of something that we've been joking about lately. Like, if you're a person who wants to make everyone happy all the time, you're probably going to be drawn to polyamory, and then it's going to dismantle you.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. Who was the person who said they were on the fence about it?
Yes, it's a growth opportunity for sure, and that's what we're all really in this for, is to become better people, learning about ourselves.
And parking lot makeouts.
Yes.
Learning about ourselves.
Different.
Just to be clear, I'm also here for that.
Yep. Okay, so let's wrap things up and go get pizza. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Evergreen Hearts. It was so wonderful to be here and to do our first in-person Mistakes Were Made episode. Thanks for being a part of that. It was great.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us for our first ever live episode of Mistakes Were Made. Hopefully first, but not last live episode. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at mistakescast@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at mistakescast. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.
Bye, everybody.